World War II is over, but tensions are still high. The capitalist USA and communist USSR are very angry at each other because they don't like how the other thinks. Not wanting to lead to MAD, they let out their anger through proxy wars, because technically it isn't against each other. The US would always fight, as the president, Harry S. Truman, believed in continuing communism through any means possible, as he said in the 1947 Truman Doctrine. He also used Marshall Plans to give money to struggling economies to show them that capitalism is simply better. Finally, to intimidate the USSR, NATO was formed so that if they tried anything, the countries could call each other and the USSR would get teamed on. This was also to prevent domino theory, which is if one country becomes communist, others around it would too. After the war ended, both parties tried liberating Korea, but met at the 30th parallel, where they split the country. The communist north was led by Kim Il-sung, and the south by Syngman Rhee. In 1949, despite US troops in Korea, Il-sung came to Stalin and was like, "Please, can I invade the south?" "No." "Why?" "They have troops." And this lasted till 1950, when US troops were sent to Europe for the Cold War there, so Il-sung went to Stalin like, "Can I invade the south now?" "Okay." So on June 25th, 1950, the north invaded the south. The south were weak and got pushed all the way to Busan, to what we call the Busan Perimeter. Since they were kinda screwed, they were like, "Hey, UN, we kinda need some help. The North Koreans got us pushed back to the coast." So the UN voted and formed a US-led coalition of 16 countries. This worked as the USSR were boycotting the UN as they were salty that new communist friend China wasn't allowed in the Security Council. This coalition was led by the man himself, Douglas MacArthur, who was a general in World War II as well. He had the 10,000 IQ strategy of an amphibious landing at Incheon, near Seoul. This was risky, but if it worked, it would pay off and turn the tides. And it did. On September 15th, 1950, the successful landing allowed for Seoul to be retaken, and for a pincer attack to surprise the North Koreans. This allowed the UN to push them back to the 30th parallel, but MacArthur wasn't done. He wanted more as this victory got to his head. The UN pushed past the 30th parallel, but as they approached the Yalu River, the border was China, the leader, Mao Zedong, warned him, "Do not go any further. Do it and I will get involved." But MacArthur was like, "Who cares, I'll do it anyway." So 200,000 Chinese volunteers crossed and fought for North Korea, pushing the UN back across the 30th parallel, allowing Seoul to be captured again in November 1950. After a few months, in March 1951, Seoul was retaken and the two sides were at similar points to they were when the war began. MacArthur was annoyed at this Chinese threat, so he went to Truman. "We should nuke China." "No." "Why?" "No." "Why?" "No." "Why?" "Get out." So on April 11th, 1951, he was sacked and replaced by Matthew Ridgway, who stayed for the rest of the war. In April, the Chinese attempted their spring offensives, sending 700,000 men. The coalition barely managed to beat this. 2 months later, in July 1951, peace talks began, yet the fighting didn't stop. For 2 years, meaningless fighting occurred, with many bombings occurring. Finally, in July 1953, an armistice was signed and the fighting stopped. The peninsula was divided in two, roughly along the 30th parallel again, with a demilitarized zone between them. Overall, the war led to many civilian deaths, especially in the north, and a huge cost. Tensions were also built, as China were angry at the US for keeping troops in the south after the war, and the USSR and China were mad at each other due to the bill and who would pay it. The only positive was that containment was fulfilled, as the south did not fall to communism.